Despite not being the country in Latin America where the most EVs are sold, Costa Rica is currently the leader in the adoption of EVs. At a global level, the undisputed leader in EV adoption is Norway, which by 2023 has already reached 80% adoption rate of EVs. It is estimated that by the end of 2025, all new car purchases in Norway will be fully electric. If we compare Norway with Costa Rica in sales of electric cars, the difference is quite significant. Costa Rica has barely reached 7.3% in electric adoption. However, Costa Rica, being a much poorer country than Norway, has a very similar mentality to Norway. That is why we dare to predict that Costa Rica will be the first country in Latin America to reach 100% sales of EVs. We do not know when, if in 2030 or 2040, but it is almost certain that it will be the first. If you want to understand the details of how I reached this conclusion, be sure to first subscribe to my YouTube channel and Facebook page. What do Costa Rica and Norway have in common? In both countries, the governments of the day have a long-term vision of protecting the environment, not only on moral grounds, but also to minimize hospital costs for cancer and lung diseases caused by pollution from gasoline cars. In most countries around the world, morality and the environment are considered superfluous. Profits and job creations have always come before the environment. Both Costa Rica and Norway have regarded protecting the environment as a top priority for the economy and security of the nation. Both countries believe that in the long term, protecting the environment will bring economic dividends instead of being a nuisance. The case of Norway. As many of you know, Norway has one of the highest per capita incomes in the world. And despite not being a member of OPEC, Norway's economy is based on the huge profits from oil. However, the long-term vision in Norway is that oil will not last a lifetime, and therefore, for several years, it has been planning to diversify its economy away from oil. Norway has a sovereign wealth fund that invests oil profits in shares of public corporations around the world. Instead of continuing to invest in more oil companies, Norway has decided to invest in clean energy such as solar and wind, and in companies that in some way contribute to protect the environment. This strategy is quite different from other oil producers such as Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, and the United States itself. These countries are very scared to fully support companies that give priority to environmental protection for fear of cannibalizing the profits they are getting in the short term from oil. In these oil-producing countries, one of the preferred strategies is to use greenwashing to simulate support for the environment. In practice, with greenwashing advertising campaigns, the oil industry lobbies to stop or delay the introduction of clean and sustainable energies such as electric cars. Norway's state policy has been to fully support the adoption of electric cars by passing laws that prohibit the sale of gasoline cars. This policy has been so successful that it is expected that by the end of 2023, 80% of all cars sold in Norway will be EVs. And by the end of 2025, it is estimated that all cars sold will be EVs. Norway has been a haven for Tesla, where it has been able to sell its luxury EVs since the purchasing power of Norwegians is one of the highest in the world. Unlike the Arab oil countries, Norway has a promising future. By the time oil becomes scarce or too expensive, Norway will no longer be dependent on oil, but on a well-diversified economy that will include green energies. For the oil-producing Arab countries, the future is very uncertain, and these countries know it. But because they are used to short-term profits, in practice, they do not do much to diversify their economy. We can predict that economies of the oil-rich Arab countries are going to collapse in the not too distant future. The case of Costa Rica. Costa Rica, unlike the countries in Latin America, such as Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico, is not rich in raw materials like oil, rare earth. However, Costa Rica has the great advantage where the educational level of the majority of its population is much higher than that of other Latin American countries. This has allowed Costa Rica to plan for the long term and to understand that environmental protection is paramount. In most Latin American countries, people only think in the short term, and the majority of the population believe that gasoline and plastics are also eco-friendly and that electric cars produce the same environmental pollution as gasoline cars. All these people are bothered by being told that their gasoline car is polluting, and they prefer to remain silent or avoid the issue. Costa Rica has bet on ecological and sustainable tourism, and for this reason, electric cars are the perfect complement. Ecotourism has been so successful in Costa Rica that a large majority of tourists from Europe and the United States prefer Costa Rica to other Latin countries, even though other countries have more luxurious hotels, better highways, and shopping centers. Costa Rica generates 99% of its electricity from green energy, such as solar, wind, and hydroelectric. Costa Rica was ahead of most Latin American countries when it introduced the first EV in the country back in 2009. It was an e-Zone model made in South Korea. In 2017, Zipcar from California, a pioneer in shared electric mobility, chose Costa Rica as the first country to expand into Latin America. In 2017, the Costa Rican National Assembly approved Law 9518 on incentives for electric transportation and the use of EVs, including exemptions from taxes on consumption, sales, and custom duties for imports. An additional incentive package was added in 2018 that not only includes import cuts, but also key benefits such as the removal of license plate driving restrictions, exception from annual registration vehicle fees, and free parking in designated areas. Currently, in most Latin American countries, there is greenwashing with the promotion of hybrid cars by governments and car manufacturers. During the period from 1997 to 2007, hybrids were the most ecological cars you could find. But after 2008, with the introduction of the Roadster, Tesla's first electric, hybrids are already obsolete technology. Hybrids are used most of the time in gasoline mode and do not make much difference to decarbonize the economy. However, companies like Toyota refuse to sell fully electric cars, preferring to sell hybrids by disguising them as electric and eco-friendly. Costa Rica has understood that hybrids are an attempt to extend sales of gasoline cars as long as possible. For this reason, the country only gives tax credits to its citizens to buy 100% electric and not hybrids. In Latin America, the country that sold the most EVs in 2022 was Brazil, with 8,458 units sold. Mexico was second with 4,370 units, and Costa Rica, despite being much smaller than Brazil and Mexico, was third, managing to sell 2,674 units. But more important than the total number of units sold is the percentage of annual sales that were EVs. And this is where Costa Rica shines and was first in Latin America. In Costa Rica, 7.3% of all cars sold in 2022 were EVs. Meanwhile, in Brazil and Mexico, the percentage barely reached 0.04%. In Costa Rica, despite rapid growth and its leadership, at the regional level, EVs in use only represent 0.5% of the national fleet of light vehicles. There is still a long way to go for Costa Rica and the rest of Latin America, and more affordable models are required. The brands that in 2022 led the sales of electric cars in the country were BYD with 1,209 units, corresponding to a market share of 45.2%, followed by Audi with 375 and a market share of 14%, JAC with 175 units, JAC Aeon with 142, Hyundai with 128, and BMW with 130 units. It must be clarified that Costa Rica dominance in the adoption of EVs is limited to passenger cars. As for the public transport of electric buses, Costa Rica does not stand out. The main players here are Colombia and Chile. The case of Colombia is worth noting since in 2022, 1,006 new electric buses were registered, thus surpassing Chile as the country with the largest fleet of electric buses in Latin America. However, Bogotá and Santiago continue to be the cities with the largest fleet of electric buses outside of China. We will end by stating that Costa Rica is setting the example for other Latin American countries to follow. In this region, there are no large-scale manufacturers of local cars. Most cars are imports, and there is no reason to defend foreign brands that do not provide eco-friendly cars with the best technology. Latin American countries cannot afford to buy all the gasoline car crap that nobody's going to want in the first world countries. Countries that are left behind with excess inventory of gasoline cars are destined to remain part of the third world.